Growing up, I knew my town was weird. And when I say weird, I don't mean quirky small town. I mean really weird. I think the first time I noticed this was when I was 8 years old. I was at church with my family, an activity which I found incredibly boring. No offense to Jesus, but SpongeBob was just more interesting. Due to this boredom, my mind would usually begin to wander, and I would often stare off into the distance. Today, as my gaze broke from the preacher, I noticed something odd behind the podium. It was 3 red gasoline cans, and from the brown outline inside I could tell they were full. This was especially weird because it was during the summer. There was no need for heating. But as soon as my mind thought of how odd it was for there to be gasoline in the need for heating what was already hot, I focused back on the preacher, and the service was soon over. The next day I was awoken by the sound of my mother sobbing hysterically, and the television blaring some sort of news. When she did, she tried her best to explain to an 8-year-old that several of my friends, and her friends as well, had died in a fire when the church had suddenly caught ablaze. The preacher who had tried to save them was also killed. I cried because it was the only thing I could understand to do at the time. As the weeks went by, families mourned the losses of loved ones, and the news began reporting more bizarre aspects of the fire. Apparently, some of the children's bodies were never found. This baffled police because, according to the reports, the doors were locked and all the windows were still unbroken. The missing children were declared a cold case 3 years later on my 11th birthday. Time went by. I eventually was able to get over the death of my friends that were killed in the fire, and eventually I began becoming a top student. Getting a good job and going to a university, far from that small, weird town and all the pain it brought with it. For a while, everything was peaceful. My life was perfect. One day, after a long night of university drinking, I was abruptly woken up by a call from my friend Chad. He had stayed in town due to his mother's illness and was wondering if I'd like to go visit him in hot bars for a night. I immediately said yes, and within a week I was prepared for my trip. Arriving into town the second time was strange. Leaving it was like leaving the land of Oz and going to Kansas. Going back was like being thrown back into a world of just pure awe and strangeness. It's hard to explain how this town makes me feel, even now, knowing what I know. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I arrived at Chad's house around 3 p.m. and greeted his mother. Her chemotherapy was apparently doing wonders for her, and they were in high hopes of remission. Chad and I left for the bars and said goodnight to his mother. We got into the car and began driving. "So, what's it like in the big city, Mr. University?" he asked, nudging my arm. "Oh, you know, man, just being a busybody, trying to get it over with as fast as possible." The ride went quiet for a bit. We exchanged some small talk, but nothing noteworthy. We were going to save that for the bar. As we kept driving, we came upon a car crash. I was prepared to stop when Chad pulled out a knife and pressed it to my stomach. "Keep driving or I'll gut you," he said in a calm voice. I kept going, passing the crash victims as they screamed for help. "What the hell was that all about? They needed help!" I yelled. Chad was blocking me out. He was on his phone dialing 911. It was clear he knew something. "Chad, what the hell's going on?" I said again, staring at him angrily and confused. He looked scared and almost white as a ghost. "You've been gone too long to know the true stories about what happened, haven't you?" he said. "I suppose so. How about you enlighten me?" I replied, a hint of anger still in my voice. "I can't explain it now, but tonight, watch the news and you'll learn all you need to know," he said quietly. "If you're wrong about this, I'm kicking your ass," I said, trying to forgive him. Maybe just trying to believe him that those people didn't need help. That night, I sat down into my lazy boy and turned on the television, switching it to the news. The reports were talking about cultists who would pretend to be car crash victims in order to lure people to be used in sacrifices. The part of the news broadcast that will always stick with me was the face of the leader. It was the preacher at the church all those years ago. Among the bodies that were found, several of the children who went missing during the fire were present, mutilated and decayed from years of ritual abuse.